and welcome everyone to Module 12. We are discussing Chapter 11 here this week, which is based on communication. We have 4 weeks left in the semester of content before the final exam in week 5, so we are really getting down to the end of this. And I know we've been talking a lot about the sales process through this semester. So this week we are talking about communication, how to effectively communicate using both verbal communication as well as nonverbal communication. I'm sure you've heard those terms before. We're going to go through how it pertains to sales specifically, and you're going to find a little bit about yourself as well, because part of the semester, part of the course work for this week, you're going to be doing a sales metrics, basically talking about what type of person that you are and how you like to communicate. So let's go ahead and jump into the information. So here, a list of the key terms. Again, you can find these all in your book, so no need to go through these right now. Just make sure that you're familiar with each of these terms, and that you are able to identify why these are part of the sales process. So the communication process, where to begin. Communication skills are essential to any part of life, not just for your professional career, but also for your personal career as well. I'm sure that, you plenty of practice with this, whether it's with your family members, whether it's with a loved one or some friends. It's probably been the case throughout this semester, communicating with myself or communicating with other classmates for group projects, things of that nature. So communication skills are very important, and there are a number of different types of communication skills. Again, whether they're verbal, whether they're written, whether they're presentation skills, whatever it may be, over the telephone, through email, communication, controls how we live our daily lives. So rarely you'll find a position without communication skills being highlighted. When you're searching for jobs, like many of you I know probably either have been or will be soon, you will see communication written in a number of different ways on a job description, because it is that important. The old saying is that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, therefore we can listen twice as much as we speak. And we've been talking throughout each part of the process, the sales process, of how you need to listen, and then listen some more before you actually understand the information enough to speak to what the customer or the client is talking about. Communication, as we mentioned, can be verbal or nonverbal. Essentially, verbal means that you are using words, actual words, so statements of fact, opinion, attitude, that are used either through words, pictures, or numbers, and they convey a meaning to the receiver, which you can see down here below. Basically, there are 2 people in a communication process. You have the sender, who is sending a message, and then the receiver, who is receiving that message. As you know, in communication, many times the sender becomes the receiver and the receiver becomes the sender. So that's verbal communication. Nonverbal communication is quite the opposite. So it's process of sending and receiving information without using spoken or written words. So it's, things such as a thumbs up or a wink or a smile or, a peace sign, whatever it may be. Those are all examples of nonverbal communication, things that are actually sending a message. And especially in society, messages are being sent through the commonality of what people know to be true. So a thumbs up can mean good, or it can mean okay, or it can mean yes, while a thumb down means no, or disagreement, or not good, right? So we all know those things to be true. And again, same with nonverbal, you have the sender and the receiver, but with two-way communication, it has to go where both are doing, each. So that the sender is becoming the receiver is becoming the sender, that message and information is flowing to one side and then back to the other. This is two-way communication. And if you can communicate effectively and efficiently, you'll be successful in sales, and you're going to be successful in life too. So notice I didn't just say effectively, but also efficiently. We gave an example a couple of weeks ago where I was giving a presentation to the CEO of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and I thought I was going to have 15 minutes, and he basically gave me, a couple of minutes at the most. So basically I had to take the information and not only be effective with it, but be within time constraints making sure that efficiently I was getting across the most important information. So this is common through sales. You're going to be on time crunch. People are going to give you just a few minutes of their time. So you need to be really efficient as well. So let's talk about some of the causes of miscommunication that are out there. The first is obviously the physical environment. So the physical environment of what's out there. And this can be a number of different things. So if you are outside, perhaps, communication isn't heard as easily. Perhaps it could be, there's rain, or perhaps it could be that there is background noise, which you're going to see here in the second. Noise is certainly a cause of miscommunication. Maybe it's assumption. And by assumption, I'm meaning that people are not necessarily listening to what the person is saying, but rather they're just assuming that they understand what the sender is saying, and therefore they're not fully receiving the information and the communication. Therefore, they're making assumptions about what they think that they're hearing when they're actually not hearing that. So assumptions are probably, one of the biggest causes of miscommunication, which also leads into the fourth, which is lack of listening. Lack of listening certainly is an example that we just mentioned of how people can actually not receive information. And then finally, culture. Culture can be one as well. Culture miscommunication can come in the form of language. It can come in the form of, as I just mentioned, maybe somebody speaking English to someone who only speaks Spanish, or vice versa. And then also from a culture standpoint, we just talked about nonverbal communication, such as a thumbs up, or such as a peace sign, or such as a wink. These things can all mean different things based off of the culture and the society that they're being used in. There are countless examples out there, but just understand that, not everyone is going to understand the same cultural things to be true, or societal things to be true, if people are growing up in different cultures. So all of these are the case. And I think this is one of my favorite quotes down at the bottom. It's impossible for a man or a woman to learn what he or she thinks he or she already knows. So basically, it's impossible to learn what we think that we already know. And this is commonly the case with miscommunication. People are assuming, or they're not listening, or they're, doing things to understand that we think we already know what the person's going to say, when in actuality we don't. So whether it's in sales, whether it's in your personal career or your professional career, just understand that we need to truly listen to people and not formulate opinions until we fully grasp what it is we're hearing, because this is the quickest downfall for a salesperson, is trying to jump the gun and not truly listen to what the sender or the client or the customer is saying. So let's talk about sending effective verbal messages. There are several different ways that we can send verbal information or verbal messages. And again, these are statements of fact. These are opinions. These are attitudes that are encoded using words, pictures, or numbers, in which they convey a message from the sender to the receiver. So the first is a word picture. That's pretty, understanding for most people, I believe. A word picture is a story designed to help the buyer visualize a point. For example, the Mona Lisa over here to the right, we see this picture and we understand that this is a very, very famous painting. We understand that Mona Lisa is probably worth a lot of money, is probably very protective, is part of art history. So is conveying several messages to us with a picture. So essentially using a picture. Similes, metaphors, and analogies are all basic ways that we are serving a purpose that, two things are similar, right? So in a simile specifically, it's a figure of speech, usually uses like or as, and that makes a direct comparison, showing similarities between two things that are very different. So it's trying to compare two things that you might not necessarily see a link between, but it's comparing those things. Metaphor is similar. It's a figure of speech which makes a comparison between two different things that are different, but that they have some sort of common characteristic between them. So metaphors are showing, that two things are alike, and there may be some common characteristics, whereas a simile is basically taking two things that are very different and trying to make a connection between those things. And then lastly is an analogy. Analogies are usually a little more extensive. They're a little more elaborate. They're basically saying that, they're not just using one or two words. They're not just using a few words, but rather they're using a full phrase. An analogy is something basically having a direct relation as well as a simile and a metaphor, but it's ways of using other words and trying to tie things together to show commonality, but also to show that, maybe you're using something that someone might understand to try to explain something that someone might not understand. And through using effective verbal messages, you need to understand to limit slang. We talked about miscommunication. Again, slang is usually regional in dialect. It's usually, there are a number of different factors that go into it, whether it's, could be a number of things. Region of a country, could be age of a person, could be a number of different things. So understand that not everybody is going to understand or relate to slang. So you should limit slang and you should use words that people are going to understand. And this also goes back to understanding the person that you're talking to, doing your homework, doing your research, so that everybody's going to be on the same page. It also means limiting cliches. It also means limiting off-putting, insensitive word choice, whether you agree with it or not. These days, people are much more sensitive than they have been. So understanding what word choice that you can use and trying to stay neutral so that you're not offending someone, because again, as much information as you can do to understand that person, the better. But there are plenty of examples where you're not going to know every single thing about someone, and using slang, using a cliche, using something that's a little insensitive can totally derail the conversation, can get that person just focusing on that, and it can lose you the sale, and it can, lose you the relationship, but then it can also lose any sort of referrals that you may get from that person too. So it's just always better to remain neutral. Next things we want to talk about are, speaking rates, inflection, articulation. So how you can actually deliver that effective message when you're doing that. So speaking rate is simply just the speed that you're talking. Some people want people to speak very quickly. Some people want people to slow down. Again, it just depends on the setting. It depends on how much time you have. You need to make sure that you're being effective and efficient, but you also need to make sure that you're not speeding through someone where the receiver is going to be glazed over and they're not going to understand what you're saying. So the speed at the speed which the salesperson speaks, that's the speaking rate. The inflection is the tone or the pitch of your speech. So again, are you talking in a tone that is off-putting? Are you talking in a tone that is cold, that is, distant, that is, decisive and aggressive or assertive? These are all things that you need to understand. And it's good to record yourself. If you've listened to any of your Flipgrids that you've posted this year, chances are when you hear yourself talk, you sound a little different than you think you do in your head. And this is the same case with everyone. So you just have to have a lot of different practice examples and exercises to go through. And it's a good idea to have these for the sales process too, is to listen to yourself and try to picture yourself on the other side as you're listening to say, hey, would I give myself a chance to sell me on a product or a service? And then lastly is the articulation. So this is the act of forming words when speaking. Again, articulation is very different based off of where you're from, how you were raised, how old you are. Obviously, babies, as they're learning to speak, they have trouble articulating their words. The same thing with different dialects. Some may cut off, for example, myself being from the Southeast and being from Kentucky, our articulation probably sounds very different to other parts of the country, whether it's Louisiana whether it's Boston, wherever it may be. So understanding that you need to articulate your words and that you need to put as many syllables that are into words so that you are getting across the correct words so that people can understand you and that people relate to the message that you're sending across. And lastly, as we keep talking about, just know your audience. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Again, it's good to have practice with these things, but it's really good as well to have the confidence, as we've talked about, to make sure that you can still be assertive and you can be confident and you can understand that nobody's perfect. The least that you can do is be humble, be confident, and try to do the best that you can. So here are a few types of nonverbal communication that we have here. And we're going to talk through a few of these, but then we're also going to talk through things that you should do in each of these nonverbal communication aspects as well. So for example, a handshake, I'm sure you've heard most of these before. In a handshake, you need to have a firm hand. You need to make sure that your hand is not super sweaty. If it is, just give it a quick, rub on your pants before you do. Make sure that your hands are dry coming out of the bathroom and that you've actually washed your hands. But giving a handshake, you're giving a firm handshake, and you are looking at the person in the eyes when you're speaking to you and when you're giving that handshake. Body posture, you should stand up tall. You should be confident. You should not cower down. You should not have your hands together. You should not have your hands in your pockets. So very strong, confident body posture, standing strong, standing up tall, standing straight, arching your neck. All of these things are really important. Gestures, there are a number of different gestures that are there. So we're not going to go into those because there are a million of them that are there, but just understanding how you're presenting yourself, nodding, shaking your head, the difference between nodding and the difference between shaking your head. So nodding is usually a sign of affirmation. Shaking your head is usually a sign of, a negative sign. It's usually a refusal, or it's usually discontent or something to that nature. Eye contact, having strong eye contact with people throughout, not being afraid to blink, of course, but you need to make sure that you're making good eye contact. Usually shows that somebody is engaged and that they are following along with what they're saying. An eye roll usually means that somebody is either not following along, or they're not comfortable, or they're not in agreement with what the sender is saying. Facial expressions, again, we know definitely facial expressions, whether it's a smile, whether it's a frown, whether it's a scowl. There are a million different facial expressions. Touch, it's important, very important for someone when they're meeting someone for the first time. A lot of people don't like to be touched. So really the only touching that should be there within a person that you're meeting for the first time, or that you're not comfortable or have a deeper relationship with, is literally just that handshake at the beginning, maybe the handshake at the end, and that should be it. Space and proximity, making sure that, again, that you're leaving enough space for someone, that you are not completely disengaged, but also far enough away that you are not, again, invading someone's personal space. That can make somebody really uncomfortable too. And whether they want to buy from you or not, they're probably not going to if you're invading their personal space. Dressing sharp. These are all talked about in your book as well. Dressing for the occasion and understanding it's okay to ask what type of a situation it is. If you're going to call on, the government, it's probably going to look different than it is calling on a restaurant or calling on, a tech company, whatever it may be. So understanding the dress and the appearance and also the grooming habits that are acceptable, but typically being, either business casual or business professional is usually better than being the alternative. So making sure that you are perhaps overdressed in a situation as opposed to underdressed, that you're looking the part, that you're looking like you are clean, that you're looking like you are put together, because usually people will associate that to, whether it is that they're going to buy something from someone. Multitasking, you should not be multitasking when you're in a sales situation. In fact, you're probably going to get a lot of receivers or customers, clients that are doing that. It's really important to try to not do that, so that you can demand their attention and that you can demand their confidence and their respect in that time too. So we briefly mentioned this at the beginning, the social style matrix. This is something that I'm going to have you do this week rather. And the matrix does a really good job of talking about, again, the relationship between people being assertive and also being responsive. So there are 4 different, types of basically categories in the social style matrix. You can see those on figure 11.3 and page 338 in your book. And it's going to talk about the difference between drivers, expressives, amiables, and analyticals. You can see that for drivers, these are your people that are, pretty high assertive, but low responsive. Expressives that, like myself, that are high responsive, high assertive, your amiables, which are high responsive, low assertive, and then your analyticals, which are low assertive and low responsiveness to these things. So your driver is the person who's going to make a quick decision, even if others are not necessarily on board. And the driver essentially is the dominant person in the conversation. They're the person who in your group project is usually moving things along and the person you can lean on to make a decision when they need to. The expressives are the people who, are usually engaged in personal relationships, people that are, pretty animated and pretty talkative, usually, pretty extroverted. They're focused on kind of the big picture or the future, but they're really not bogged down on any of the details that are there. Your amiables are, again, the low assertiveness, high responsiveness. They're really focused on close relationships, not necessarily having a million friends, but having some really close friends. These are the people who are usually avoiding conflict and don't necessarily return or respond well to different types of sales pressure. They're people that really focus on mutual respect and building consensus relationships with people. And then your analyticals, these are people that tend to distrust making decision making. In fact, they could be really slow decision makers. They're pretty meticulous, disciplined, quiet, reserved, and usually not very outgoing. So they can be introverts or internal people. So it's important to understand who you are, what you're going to do by taking the social matrix test this week. It's not too long, maybe like 20 questions. So it's not going to take you a long time to do it, but it's really good information to understand who you are, to understand how you could come across. For example, myself, if I'm an expressive and I'm really focused on selling to an analytical person, then I need to change my approach. I can't come across just as an expressive, but I really need to do certain things to relate to this analytical person and to quote unquote reach across the aisle, as they would say in politics. So it's important to not only understand who you are, but to try to do your best to understand who you're selling to as well. So that if you're a driver, that you're not completely, running someone off that could be different from you. Or if you're expressive the same way, or if you're amiable, or if you're an analytical person, you need to do certain things sometimes to sell across the aisle to make sure that you're doing the best job that you can. Not to say that any of these 4 people are not good salespeople or don't have the capability of being salespeople either. That's not the case whatsoever. So active listening tips. The first, is pretty self-explanatory, and this is going to be to concentrate. Don't interrupt or cut the customer off. Really focus on the verbal and nonverbal cues. Take notes, do your homework and take notes, right? You shouldn't be guessing at what the person is saying. You should really do your job and make sure that you're making it easier for yourself by concentrating, and then reducing or eliminating any noise and distractions. The second thing is acknowledge. So to give encouraging feedback, subtle encouraging feedback to help the receiver, the customer, the client understand that you're with them, that you're understanding what they're talking about, and to give cues. If you need sort of clarification, you can pause people in a respectful way, but also understand that that you can give nonverbal cues without interrupting them to show that you're on board. Next is to restate. Again, fairly self-explanatory here. So, you can either, repeat the information that's said, you can try to paraphrase the information, you can clarify the information, or you can summarize the information. So all of this, all these are great ways to say, hey, this is what I think I'm hearing, and give them an opportunity to say, yes, this is, you're right on board, or nope, that's not quite what I was saying. This is what I was saying instead. Next is to show empathy. So the ability to see things as others would see them in essence. That's really, really important. So to show empathy with someone, to fully grasp the main idea, we're playing into all of these things. And then finally, as we've talked about time and time again, is silence. Listen, 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 listen some more, and then respond once you finally have all the information. So here's some examples of bad listening habits. People that don't stop talking, people that interrupt people. Again, there are ways, there are times, there are pauses, there are things that you should look for. Again, whether it's a pause in a conversation, whether it's using a nonverbal cue to allow the person to recognize that you're not with them, but really try not to interrupt someone. Not making eye contact with someone is a really bad listening habit, because then the person who's talking will probably become distracted, and they'll probably not understand if you're with them or not. Making assumptions, we talked about that. Don't make assumptions. Not being inviting. The whole RBF, the resting what face that maybe some people have. Not being inviting to a conversation can be a really bad listening habit, and it's something that some people are just simply not aware of. So it's important to understand if you have that quality, of showing ways, or to at least acknowledge that, to say, hey, you know what, this is just my face. This is not necessarily indicative of whether I'm with you or not. This is just who I am. Not giving personal space. And that, again, we talked about how that can be very uncomfortable. And then people that argue. Is just not a bad listening habit. It just shows that someone is being calculated, and they're formulating their assumptions, or making things happen. They're choosing to think things before they're actually listening to what's being said. Next, we're going to talk about building trust, because actually, in communication, trust is huge. People are not going to be effective communicators with people that they don't have trust with. So, showing that you care, an expectation, by the customer that a salesperson will engage, supporting their interest. If you have trust, you can show that you are there to provide them a solution that is actually going to be beneficial, and that you can show that you care about them. And how you can show that you care about somebody, and how you can build trust, are a number of these things. So you can call someone by their name. Calling someone by their name shows that you are invested in them, that they're not just a number, or another sales call, or another buyer, potential client, that they are actually a human being. Calling somebody their name, and then knowing how to pronounce their name as well. Even my name, Cole McKeel, it's amazing how many people misspell my last name, or put different letters in there, like McNeil. And it drives me crazy, and it really shows that somebody's just not showing enough courtesy to really look at my name, understand it, and then say it. So that's really important to me, but don't overdo it. If you say somebody's name too much, it can come across as condescending. It can come across as invasive. It can come across as threatening. How many times, when you're in trouble, does your mom call you by your name, right? Your full name usually. I know that was for me, Wesley Coleman McKeel. Every time I heard my full name, I knew I was in trouble, right? So be respectful for someone's name, but really don't overdo it. Do your homework, figure out how they say their name, figure out how, it's pronounced. For myself, for basketball recruits, I'm always trying to track down video clips to understand how it's said, or I'm looking into the university media guide to see if there's a pronunciation for it. My business partner admittedly is not very good at that, and so he always butchers names, and it's really, really, really embarrassing, and sometimes it's really not easy to come back from when you mispronounce someone's name. So just make sure, if you don't understand, ask somebody's opinion, and don't be afraid to ask someone's name, and to clarify how they say it too. That's a lot of times better than, completely butchering it. Acknowledge their words and their feelings. Prove your expertise in an assertive but not an aggressive way. So show that you are the person that is the perfect person to sell them, the products or the services. But again, not an aggressive way, but make sure that you're showing that you're assertive in a way that you can be, a subject matter expert on the matter. And then using verbal and nonverbal communication. Again, certainly when it's your turn to speak, using verbal communication. When it's not your turn to speak, using nonverbal communication to show to that person that you're along with them. And then we're going to talk about some barriers to communication as well. Things that happen, from salespeople that are just not great, ways to communicate, not great ways to get a sale. So, the first is the one size fits all sales message. I've had bosses in the past where they'll say, hey, we need to come up with proposals that are one size fits all. Even if that's what you're creating, you should at least have it unique enough that they feel like it's unique. This is really, really important. Don't send someone a blank proposal or something that is cookie cutter, but rather send somebody a proposal that at the very least has their name, has their logo, things of that nature, that doesn't feel cookie cutter. You should sell something, hey, I want to send you a proposal that's really unique and is tailored to based off the conversation we just had about what your wants and your needs are. Disorganized sales presentations, make sure it looks nice, make sure that you're flowing through your information, make sure that you set up, the message, that you deliver the message, and then you restate the message. Failure to listen is a failure to launch. We keep talking about this communication. If you're not listening, you're not selling. If you're not listening, you're not having a relationship, you're not building a relationship, and you're really not having communication. Communication breaks down when people don't listen, because communication is a two-way process. It takes a sender and a receiver. And if the receiver is not receiving the message, then they are not communicating with the sender. Therefore, there is no communication. All right. Noise, eliminating noise, right? Let's make sure that we're eliminating noise and that we're really trying our best to, focus on what the task is at hand. There have been plenty of times, not to name names, but throughout the semester where people have been on camera delivering a Flipgrid or doing something, a project, whatever it may be, and they have distractions around them. They have music in the background. They have people talking to them. They're in a public place. These are all negatives. These are all bad things in communication. You want to show that you are focused solely and that you are by yourself. The message is too long. We've talked about this. If you get 15 minutes, your message better be 12 minutes, and you better leave some time for questions at the end. And you better be able to pivot if, when you walk in the office, your boss or the CEO says, hey, you've got 2 minutes. You better be ready to take that 12-minute presentation down to 2 minutes, and actually down to 1:30 with 30 seconds for questions. Failure to adapt to the client's style. We talked about this, go back to that matrix. You need to understand how you can sell across the board and how you can communicate with people that are not like yourself, because you don't want to overwhelm people and you don't want to have people become disengaged because they're not like you. Poor management and interpretation of nonverbal cues. This is really important too. Having someone's inability to interpret nonverbal cues and manage one's own nonverbal messages, like body language. Body language is something that you have to be cognizant of, because it can give away a lot about how you're feeling to certain messages or certain situations. Physicals, appears the same way. These are all breakdowns in communication. And then lastly, just a failure to build trust. Missing one of the 5 key elements to build trust that we talked about can result in the client really not feeling comfortable with moving forward with the relationship that you have. So this is a lot of information. I recognize this. Really, when you're talking about communication, you're talking about listening to people. Most importantly, listening. Talking about understanding who they are, what they're about, what they're trying to say to you. So clarify for that information. Listen to it, clarify it, and then respond to it and come up with the best solution possible for what they're telling you. And if they're telling you that they're not interested, then don't waste your time. They're not interested. if they're telling you, hey, we're not sure about this, and you can correct things or you can change, assumptions about things, you can certainly do that. And you can do that in a very respectful way, in a timely, effective, and efficient manner. So hope that you found this information to be important, because it is very important, and we are getting down to it here. And in a couple of weeks, you're going to be actually making your own sales calls with the Paducah Chiefs Baseball Club. You're going to be actually reaching out to people and selling using the skills that you have learned through the semester. So without further ado, I'm going to cut it off here. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, as always, don't hesitate to reach out. We are really, really close to the end of the semester, so don't lose out on precious points. You have a few more assignments left. You're going to have your last quiz of the year. Then you're going to get the Paducah Baseball Club script, that assignment, which will be due in 3 weeks. And then you're going to have your final after that. So let's really focus. Let's bear down to the end of the semester, and don't hesitate to reach out. Appreciate it.